I think that it was pretty clear who the choice was for athletes.
Do you think more players will come out? Do you think more players will be political supporting, specifically Trump?
Everything that I'm talking about comes back to money. Cash rules everything around me.
I kind of like being a dude, and there's nothing wrong with being a dude.
Don't you be calling me that. We're going to have to fight.
Tell hippies back in the day that in 2024, the Democrat Party is the pro-war party.
Democratic Party is like a nude beach. Sounds great in theory, till you actually get there and see the 61-year-old woman naked on the sand.
All right, we got our two guys, the Danny Zakshevsky. You read him, you know him, you love him. And down on the bottom, our guy, Jason Ellenhammer, host of the #1 show in the great state of Indiana, Afternoon Drive News Talk, WIBC's Hammer and Nigel show. All right, boys, we were talking about this on my show earlier. We wanted to get into a discussion on a couple of things. Do you think the tide is turning in professional sports? Like we saw last week, an amateur player showed a Trump. We saw Jason Kelsey not Jason Kelsey. We saw, Nick Bosa, and then players are doing dances. Do you think players are no longer fearful of supporting Donald Trump? Danny, what do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, who would have thought that telling a bunch of 20 to 28-year-old athletes that their masculinity was toxic might actually backfire, and they might go, hey, I kind of like being a dude, and there's nothing wrong with being a dude. In fact, we kind of need dudes for a functioning society to thrive. Yeah, of course the tide is turning, and, the Democrats made a ton of mistakes. They're pushing for biological men in women's sports. I mean, all the trans stuff, like it's just not resonating with, first of all, with the general population, which is why the election went the way it did. And at a certain point, again, especially with athletes, man, come on, Dan, you were an athlete long time ago. You were an athlete. I mean, how would you have felt with a bunch of people telling you your masculinity was toxic?
I'd have been pissed because back then I took every slight personal. I did. I took every single, don't you be calling me that. We're going to have to fight because I was a little bit insecure about it. But I get your point. Not only did Bosa do the hat thing, but he did a dance. Leonard Floyd jumped in. A couple guys jumped in, Hammer. I think players and maybe people in general are feeling a little more comfortable wearing MAGA hat or go woke, go broke clothing.
I think this is something where it took a little while, but the athletes finally caught up with the public. The MAGA hat's been out there for a while. Go back to a couple years ago. Look at some of these SEC stadiums, 102,000 people all chanting "fuck Joe Biden" in unison in like the fourth quarter of games. It was happening at NASCAR races. That was kind of the genesis of the whole "Let's Go Brandon" thing when the NBC reporter mistook FJB for "Let's Go Brandon." So it took a little while, but finally it feels like the athletes feel comfortable enough to embrace what a lot of the people have been doing for so long. So, look, I don't want the athletes to get credit for turning the tide here. The tide has been turned. Donald Trump won the popular vote. He won every swing state. The tide had been turned. The athletes are just now kind of, getting welcome to the party, so to speak.
Well, that's my point. My point is that the tide has turned outside of athletics to make it comfortable for athletes to be able to do that. You go back to Michael Jordan saying even Republicans buy shoes. I'm going to go back to your point, Danny, where you talked about athletes. It was supposed that Donald Trump did not resonate with young folks. Here's this old guy, 78 years old, the old white guy. Why do you think he resonates now?
Well, because when you put him up against Joe Biden, who couldn't put a coherent sentence together, and then you decided to make Tampon Tim the new face of masculinity, or Doug Emhoff, whatever the hell Kamala Harris's pee-whipped husband said, I think that it was pretty clear who the choice was for athletes. They look at the guy who got shot and then stood up and pumped his fist and said, fight, 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 and went, that's the guy that I more identify with. Not the old doddering fool who can't walk on the beach without taking a step and falling over, or ride a bike. I mean, remember when Biden rode a bike a couple of years ago and fell over? Like the beginning was the beginning of the end has been a long time coming. And I think it's more of an identification thing. I get it that initially Donald Trump was looked at as like, oh, he's the silver spoon guy. He was born rich. I mean, most of these athletes, almost all of the athletes are not born rich, right? Like a lot of them come from bad neighborhoods, bad places. And they're like, man, I don't identify with these rich guys. But then you've got Kamala Harris, a woman who kind of got her start in politics by sleeping with a married mayor who was 40 years older than her. And there's pictures floating around with her and Montel Williams. Athletes are like, I don't identify with these people at all. If anything, I identify more with the Trump guy who these people are trying to kill. And why are they trying to kill him? What's going on there?
How much do you think that helped Trump getting shot? Which is weird to ask a question, but how much did getting shot help Donald Trump, Hammer?
It was great with street cred. I mean, look at what Donald Trump spent compared to the earned media, right? That's the key word, earned media, the free publicity you get. He was all over the place. We've all seen that picture a million times, the fight, the blood coming off the ear, to have the big over-the-top bandage on your ear walking out at the Republican convention. All of that plays into this. And to go back to something Danny Z said here, Trump's relatable to a lot of people. Might not be to everybody, but here's a dude that has got the law coming after him, which a lot of people thought was unfair. You got side chicks coming at you left and right. Like, that's a lot of people in this country. They relate more to that than they do Kamala Harris up there giving your money to Ukraine and, blaming you for all of the problems in the community. Money talks and bullshit walks. And Donald Trump, he put that message out there, right? We're going to take care of your money. And a lot of this nonsense is going to go away. And I think that's a big part of the reckoning, if you will, with athletes and pop culture.
I think the issues resonated to your point. I think people say, wait a second here. Hold on. Even athletes go to the grocery store. Even athletes know what a difference in an electricity bill is. Even athletes understand, hey, man, you just can't let everybody into our country. And I don't mean to say even athletes, as a condescending kind of tour, but they're not necessarily the most vocal. And I think that the policies or the problems not being addressed by Biden, not being addressed on the campaign trail by Harris led to this. Like, all right, let's talk about this. So Megan Rapinoe, who, whatever Megan Rapinoe is, and most women echoed what Harris said, which is only about abortion. I didn't give a shit about abortion. I didn't care about Project 2025, and I sure the hell don't care about January 6th. And I think most people feel that way, and people were waiting. Okay, what's your solution to this, Danny? I don't think we ever got a solution from the Harris side, so athletes are like, what the hell? These are easy policies.
Well, and to your point, and I said earlier, these athletes didn't come from money, but they sure as hell got money now. And even when Kamala Harris is up there talking about unrealized corporate gains taxes, you don't think those players' accountants were on the phone with them like, hey, this would be bad for us because I got your money in a lot of places. And if you want that to grow, we don't want this. I'm sure all of that matters, man. Like, again, these guys have money, and you hear Kamala Harris continuing the typical Democrat platform of Robin Hood. We're going to steal from the rich and give to the poor. Except the problem is, which has always been the problem with the Democratic policy, is like, hey, we want to take money from rich people and give it to poor people. Like, okay, it sounds good in theory. It's like everything with the Democratic Party. It's like Dennis Miller said. The Democratic Party is like a nude beach. Sounds great in theory, till you actually get there and see the 61-year-old woman naked on the sand, It all sounds good, but the problem is the government's terrible at spending money. So you take money from rich people, fine, I guess, and do what with it? Nothing. Everything still sucks. Crime is out of control. The border's out of control. Our school systems aren't working. Like, the money isn't being spent in a good way. And athletes, just like anyone else, if you're going to take money from them, you sure as hell better be doing something good with it.
Athletes buy eggs too. Athletes buy bread too. They go to the grocery store, or they have somebody that goes to the grocery store, but it's their money. And you're right, man. The policies are what this comes down to. And I don't want to be so negative all the time. Like, so many of these conversations get negative and everybody just bitches and moans. I'm actually feeling pretty good because 4 years ago, this country said, you know what? I don't like Donald Trump. He's mean. He's brash. He has mean tweets. Let me go with old Grandpa Joe here. He's going to be right down the middle. People bought that. And what happened? During 4 years, open border, high crime, everything costs a lot more, 2 major wars going on that we're funding that we're not really a part of. People said, all right, we screwed up. We own this one. And Donald Trump won every single swing state. And not that it matters, because I'm not a popular vote guy. That's not how we pick the president. But he did win the popular vote. So I'm okay with America saying, sorry, we butchered this one. Policies matter. And we got you this time around.
And not even just that, man. Donald Trump is real, right? Like, there was no bigger political actor who was, like, really bad at it than Kamala Harris. Obama, Biden, like, they all pretend to believe in things that they don't believe in. Obama was against gay marriage, then he was for it. Joe Biden, I mean, there's tons of policies he was against 30 years ago, and now he's suddenly for it because he sticks his finger in his mouth, puts it up, and goes, oh, which way is the wind blowing this morning? That's the way I'll go. But Harris was so bad. Like, it was so obvious that this was not even a real person, that this was just a puppet that people were feeding lines to. I think the clips resonated where her prompter goes out and she's like, oh my God, what do? I don't have a canned speech. Whereas Trump goes out there with no notes, like he's got a couple of beats on a sheet that are like, oh yeah, I want to talk about crime. Okay, here's 20 minutes on crime that I got off the top of my head. I think he just came across more as a real person, and that mattered a lot.
You know, do you think this weekend, going back to Bosa and others, you know, I mentioned a Drake football player, a guy scored touchdown a couple weeks ago. Do you think more players will come out? Do you think more players will be political supporting specifically Trump? Do you think it'll, whether it's the NFL, whether it's college? And let me ask you maybe a question that the absolute answer is no. But do you think people in Hollywood, do you think entertainers, do you think more public people will be comfortable coming out in support of Trump? I'm not saying wear a MAGA hat, but I am saying support Trump. Or do you think it's still, I see you shaking your head, Dan.
No.
You're shaking no, and Hammer, you're shaking your head yes. Whoever wants to go, go.
I'll go first here, because if you're going to come out as a conservative in Hollywood, you better have the clout and own your own company. Like, one of the worst kept secrets is that Adam Sandler is like a quiet conservative, closet conservative, doesn't go out there and, wave the MAGA flag. But he's one of those dudes that owns his company, brings all of his friends in, like Rob Schneider, who is pretty outspoken, Kevin James, a lot of these dudes, they're not all in on the left. But Sandler owns the company, so he can pull that off. Vince Vaughn's another one. Vince Vaughn, quiet conservative. And this is coming from a buddy of mine who's a stunt guy out in Hollywood. There's a little secret society of some of these dudes that they can't just bang their chest and, go out and say, build the wall. But there's a few of them. But you can't be some up and comer. You can't be a young dude out in Hollywood. Or if you want to be invited to the parties, if you want to be the George Clooney, if you want to be one of these types of dudes, and going to the parties is the most important thing, then you got to do with whatever the DNC says.
Yeah, how do you know a Hollywood person is a liberal? They'll tell you. How do you know they're a conservative? They don't say anything. The difference is, and the reason I don't think we'll see more of it is because I think Hollywood, by and large, is liberal. Like, these are people, especially all the producers, most of the actors, like, they are liberals. The thing with athletes, and the reason this is turning, they were all conservatives. They just didn't say it, right? I don't think anything's changed with Hollywood. It's still 90% liberal. They still all believe in all this crap. And so you're not going to just randomly see a ton more of it there. I think with athletes, they were always conservatives. They just didn't say it out loud because they were afraid of losing sponsorships, losing endorsements. Once that barrier appeared to be pulled away, they just let out who they were. Hollywood's been telling us who they are forever. We know who they are. They're not changing.
And on sponsorships and endorsements, that's important because, again, everything that I'm talking about comes back to money. Cash rules everything around me. The old Wu-Tang song here. But Bosa got fined for wearing the MAGA hat on the field. Now, mind you, this is the same NFL that had a massive get out and vote campaign. That damn commercial was on every 5 minutes, where I've got Adam Thielen and these guys telling me, you got to get out and vote. You got to get out and vote. Here's one of the stars of the league that goes out there with a hat on supporting a candidate, and they fine him for it. Do you think the NFL would have fined Bosa if he would have had some sort of Kamala Harris hat on? I don't think so. I don't think they
do. I think they would have. I do. I think they would have. But Let me go back to television and movies. You know, what one of the things that came out of the campaign, and the governor of Pennsylvania was overlooked, and the report is he was Jewish. That the handling of Israel, Hamas, all that has been terrible. I've actually said on my show, if you're a Jewish person, you got to tell me how you're voting for Harris or how you're voting for Biden, because they have been, I'm not going to say they've been anti-Semitic, but they certainly have been supportive. Hollywood is controlled, used to be, maybe still is, by Jewish money. Guys that were Jewish ran the television stations, the movie studios. I went on a tour with a guy that was the CEO, whatever. He directed the entire Universal Studios. He was a Jewish guy. I'm kind of fascinated by Hollywood because of the Jewish influence. I really am. I think that tide has changed with Shapiro not being, and them being, I think, openly, not anti-Semitic, but certainly not pro-Jewish. Let's put it that way.
It's always been frustrating to me that the Jewish community, by and large, lives very conservative lifestyles. That's why the Jewish community is very successful, because they wait to get married. They have kids once they're married. They stay together. They focus on making sure their kids are educated. Like, they live that traditional conservative lifestyle, but by and large, they vote for democratic policies that don't even align with how they live their lives. It's always been I've been trying to wrap my head around why that is the case, because to your point, and I think you're right, like, it took this for the Jewish community to be like, wait a minute, these people hate us. They hate our lifestyle. They hate that we're successful. They hate us. It took a war where a terrorist group was like, we want you all dead. And half the people were like, yeah, we support that. To be like, whoa, wait a minute. There's one thing to be against the lifestyle we lead, but now you're actually supporting a terrorist organization that has openly said our goal is to wipe your country off the planet. Yeah, man, I think the tide is shifting there, and good.
And if you're wondering where that hate comes from, look at the college campuses here. And I'm not even really talking about the students. Some of these professors, some of these faculty members. Coach, you'll know this, down in Bloomington last year when they had the Hamas encampments all over Indiana's camp. It wasn't just students who are taking part in the flavor of the month when it comes to activism. It was teachers, it was professors, it was faculty members. How would you feel if you were a Jewish student and you're just trying to get to your math class and one of your professors is blocking your path? One of the great people you need to follow on social media is a cat by the name of Adam Gillette. He works with accuracy in media. His whole thing is to go to these college campuses and just expose how toxic and how bad some of these faculty members are. It's really eye-opening. Like, if you think it's bad, you aren't thinking it's bad enough when you see some of these stories. From Columbia to even VMI, Virginia Military Institute. They just hired one of the Columbia professors who was the biggest, most outspoken bigot they had on campus. That's coming into the Virginia Military Institute now. So if you're wondering where all of these young anti-Semites are getting some of their views, take a look at the college campuses, man.
Let me say this too, because we were all young, right? Like, we started this by talking about young people sort of turning towards Trump. Like, young people are looking to rebel. It's part of growing up. It's part of that process. And over the last 20 years, like, it's been the Republicans that you'd have to rebel against, right? Like, that's your grandpa. That's your old racist grandpa sitting over there in the corner. That's who you're rebelling against. But it's flipped, guys. Like, the Democrats, as much as they keep saying that we're the little guy, like, no, they're the machine. They control the media, Hollywood, the government. Everything's all these left-wing loonies and the Democrats, and young people are now going back the other way. That's the way our society works. It just keeps going in cycles and circles. And what we have now is Donald Trump somehow ended up the guy who came from money, who is a rich old white guy who is worth billions of dollars, is suddenly the little guy fighting against this giant machine that seems out to get him. And again, back to him getting shot. Like, there's no better proof that they're out to get him than a bullet to 2 inches from his brain.
Tell hippies back in the day that in 2024, the Democrat Party is the pro-war party. Their heads would spin around like Beetlejuice.
Pro-big pharma. They're the pro-big pharma. Are you kidding?
All right, last thought. You're saying you do or you do not see this weekend, you will not or you will see this weekend more players being politically active, either on the field after the game for Trump, college and pro.
I think you'll see a college player more so than an NFL player. The college kids, somebody's going to do the dance, right? The Leslie dance, somebody's going to do that. But in the NFL, I don't know. It feels like they've already had their dances choreographed and scripted well in advance. Like they don't have time to go to some of the meetings, Anthony Richardson, but hot damn, do they have a dance ready to go? And hat tip to the dude for the Minnesota Vikings who did the break dancing like that chick in the Olympics. That was phenomenal. He did it better than that woman. So, yeah, you'll see it in college, but I think the NFL guys, they've already got their own thing.
And thank you, NFL, for finally letting these guys celebrate again. It's part of it. It's an entertainment. I mean, come on, let's not pretend like we love the sport, we love the game, but there's an entertainment factor. Thankfully, they're letting this happen. I mean, look, man, the election's over. Donald Trump can't run for president again, so I think there'll be less of it just because, again, we're out of election season, which, by the way, thank God. Oh, so happy there are no more commercials. I'm done. I'm glad
I miss it. I love it. I am here for the hate. I am here for the trash talk. I am open for hire if anybody wants somebody to write a negative campaign ad against them. I feel like that's my second calling if I get blown out from my radio station.
I don't like it. And I'll tell you what, I just got tired of the effeminate Tim Walz and all that crap. And I got tired of the freaking voice, that freaking Kamala Harris voice. It made me nuts. Boys, appreciate you. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.